In the previous module, we talked about the different elements that can exist within a phrase, namely modifiers and heads. In this module, we'll look at different ways of categorizing those modifiers. One way of categorizing them is whether they're complements or specifiers, and another way of categorizing them is whether they're adjuncts or arguments. So we saw within a phrase there could be more than one modifier for a head. You could have a phrase that is just a head, such as cats meowed, in which cats is the noun phrase that just has the head cats. Meowed is a verb phrase which just has the verb meowed. You could have a single modifier or you could have multiple modifiers. And if there are multiple modifiers, one of these is going to be in a closer relationship with the head than the other one. Let's look at some examples. So in the verb phrase, felt sorry for him, I've got felt, which is the head, and then two modifiers, sorry, how I felt, and for him, kind of for whom I felt sorry. So sorry is actually in a much closer relationship with felt, sort of inalienably linked to felt. I had to feel something. For him is a little bit more like extra information. For him modifies not just how I felt. I didn't feel just for him, but I felt sorry for him. For him tells me for whom I felt sorry. It modifies this combination of felt and sorry. $2 scoops of ice cream. Scoops of what? Scoops of ice cream. So of ice cream is something essential or kind of inherent to the nature of these scoops. And then I've got some extra information about them. They're which scoops of ice cream? What kind of scoops of ice cream am I talking about? I'm talking about the $2 scoops of ice cream. So $2 is a little bit more removed. It modifies not just scoops, but this entire combination of scoops and of ice cream. And then under my window, under is a preposition. Under has a relationship built into it as a preposition. Under something. I've got to have something. There's got to be something there. In this case, under my window. Under only makes sense because my window exists as well. So my window is in a very close relationship with under my window. And then right is an adverb. It's telling me how far under my window, or like where under my window, directly under my window, not just kind of under my window. So right is actually a more removed, it's a little bit more distant relationship. It modifies not just the head under, but the whole thing under my window. The element which is in the closest relationship, the modifier which is in the closest relationship to the head, is the one that we call the complement. You can think of it complementary distribution, the thing that kind of has to be there to complete the picture. The one that modifies both the combination of the head and the complement, the one which is in this a little bit more distant relationship, is the specifier. So if we make one of these little mobile things that's kind of hanging, we can see that feel and sorry, felt and sorry are kind of hanging from the same little point. We've got the head and the complement. And then for him is hanging in a little bit more distant relationship, sort of one step removed. And for him is connected to this entire thing of feeling sorry. For him is a modifier of feeling sorry. You can say like a sister too. If this is the mother position, these are daughter positions, then these two are sisters to each other. So sorry is a sister of felt. It's kind of modifying how I felt. For him is a modifier. It's a sister of felt sorry, for whom I felt sorry, where that feeling sorry was directed. Again, scoops of ice cream. This is the head, this is the complement. There in an intimate relationship. Then $2 is sort of one step removed. It's a little bit out, and it's telling me information not just about scoops, but about this entire grouping of scoops of ice cream. It connects to this whole thing, scoops of ice cream. $2 is a sister of scoops of ice cream, a modifier of scoops of ice cream. And the same thing with right under my window. Under my window is the complement of under. It's in that close relationship. Right is the specifier of under. Right is modifying the whole thing of under my window, that combination of the head plus the complement. So for him is the specifier of felt, sorry is the complement of felt, but that's just kind of standing for that there's this kind of a relationship where one is in a closer relationship with the head than the other. $2 would be the specifier of scoops, right would be the specifier of under. That's the kind of relationship that it has. There's four possible arrangements. If you think of this again like a mobile hanging, a mobile, these things will sort of turn in the wind or twist. And so you end up with different linear arrangements of the colorful items that are hanging as these elements sort of rotate around. In two of these arrangements, the head is appearing to the left of the complement in these two. And in others, the head is appearing to the right of the complement in these two. In two of these arrangements, the specifier is to the left of that whole grouping of head and complement in these two. And in two of these arrangements, the specifier is to the right of that whole grouping. So these kind of explain how we get different word orders, not only within a language, or why different phrases within a language would have different patterns, but also sort of preferences across languages. So in general, English likes to have a complement before a head, whereas a language like Spanish might prefer to have the head before the complement, but we'll see that there can be even variation within that. So in terms of examples of this sort of an order, here's an example of a verb phrase: slowly opened the door. Slowly is how I opened the door, and then the door is what I opened. Slightly is how much colder than I expected. Than I expected is something telling me about colder. So this would be an adjective phrase. This whole thing would be a verb phrase. The head of the verb phrase would be the verb open. The head of this adjective phrase would be the adjective colder. Not quite happy about it, it's another adjective phrase. Happy about it, and then not quite is telling me how happy about it I am. About it is telling me something about the nature of this happiness. Where is this happiness aimed, or where is it directed? Some examples of this sort of order in English: happy for me in a weird way, or cost more than expected as a rule. If you want to say like houses in Monterey cost more than expected as a rule. So in a weird way isn't telling me how happy I am. It's telling me how happy for me I am, or something about the nature of this happiness for me. As a rule is telling me how frequently these things cost more than expected, not just how much they cost, because they always would cost, but how much do they cost more than expected. So this is a specifier. It modifies that whole combination. Here's some examples for sentences in English or phrases in English where the head would come after the complement, but that combination before the specifier. 1 year ago, yesterday. So ago is a preposition, although in this case it's kind of coming after the noun, so it's maybe a postposition. But ago, it needs some sort of noun in order to have any meaning. 1 year ago. So 1 year is the complement of ago. And then when was it 1 year ago? It was 1 year ago yesterday. So yesterday modifies not just ago, but yesterday modifies this whole grouping of 1 year ago. Giant whales. So giant is an adjective modifying the noun whales. Giant whales. Where were these giant whales? They were giant whales in the harbor. Giant whales were in the harbor. So giant whales, this is kind of the extra information in a more distant relationship. And a final example would be just 3 days ago. So again, I have this ago and 3 days ago. It was just 3 days ago. So this means that it was less than expected. The viewer might have been, or the listener might have been expecting it to be longer ago, just 3 days ago. This would be the specifier, or those little dogs. Which little dogs? Those ones. So those is telling me which of all of the little dogs am I talking about here. Little would be the complement of dogs. It's in a closer relationship with dogs than this determiner those is. Those is in a more distant relationship with dogs, and it's telling me which kind of little dogs am I talking about. Another way of thinking about these are that arguments are elements that must be in a sentence. If they're left out, in fact, the sentence is going to be ungrammatical. It's an impossible sentence to say. No native or expert speaker of the language would actually ever say this. So he seemed. This is impossible in English. I can't say this because seemed has an argument. There must be something after seemed. One of the things that could fill that spot that has to be there is an adjective. He seemed happy. He seemed blue. He seemed nice. They eliminated, again, this is impossible as a sentence. But if I have an object of that verb eliminated, something after it, then that's okay. They eliminated what? They eliminated all inefficiencies. You know, if I just said, oh, they eliminated, you would be kind of waiting, what? What did they eliminate? That's a sign you need that argument. You need that thing to be there. I worked for. I can't say that. I can say I worked hard or I worked slowly. Those adverbs work, but this preposition for can't just exist on its own. it needs an object. I worked for what? For Safeway. As soon as I get an object for that preposition, I'm fine. So the preposition for has an argument, something that has to be there in order for this to work. These arguments will tend to be the complements of the head, the ones that are in that close relationship with the head, although there are certain heads that will have two arguments, both a complement and a specifier. Adjuncts are not elements that have to be there, but rather elements that can be there. If they're left out, the sentence is just fine because these are just optional information. So we saw he seemed needs an adjective happy in order to work. He seemed happy, but there's lots of other kinds of extra information I could put in. He seemed happy about it. He seemed happy yesterday. He seemed happy like I thought he would. He seemed happy about it yesterday like I thought he would. I could put one or more of these different things. They're optional. These are adjuncts. They eliminated all inefficiencies. They eliminated all efficiencies from the process, one by one, gradually. So this is kind of optional information that can be there. It doesn't have to be there. These are optional modifiers for how all of these inefficiencies were eliminated. I worked for Safeway. I could say I worked only for Safeway. I worked for Safeway in my neighborhood. So these things are optionally modifying this whole notion of for Safeway. Only for Safeway, not for something else. For Safeway in my neighborhood and not another one. Adjuncts then tend to be the specifiers of the head. They tend to modify both the head and the complement. That's sort of that combination. They're in that one step removed spot on the mobile. So these patterns, what can appear, what must appear, what can't appear, this is all called the argument structure of a lexical item. Sometimes this is called the lexical grammar, sometimes the lexical syntax. Basically what we're talking about here is what little piece of syntax has to be memorized when you learn this lexical item. In order to fully know everything there is to know about this lexical item, everything that a native or expert speaker would know about this lexical item, you need to know a little piece of the grammar as well. For example, if I wanted to learn the English preposition for, knowing the meaning of for isn't enough. I would need to know that for has to have, it's got an argument of this noun phrase. So there has to be a noun phrase in its complement position here in order for it to work. And then there's a lot of options for what could be an adjunct. One option would be a prepositional phrase. One option could be an adverb. In order to learn the verb seem in English, I would know that there has to be something which appears right after it. One of those options could be an adjective, like seemed blue, seemed down. I could put a prepositional phrase as an argument here. Seemed like a clown, seemed like a good idea. And then there's lots of other things, adjuncts. I could put like for a little while, or the way that I thought it would, or some other kind of clause or adverb or prepositional phrase. There's a spot here in the specifier of seem position for this kind of optional information, these various adjuncts that can appear. So at least this much of the grammar, this little bit of mobile, this little bit of syntax tree would have to be learned along with the head as I learn the meaning of that word.